That refreshing, ice-cold glass of water you reach for after a walk or a long day might feel like a reward. But for your heart, it's a sudden, violent shock to the system. If you're over 60, that crisp sensation isn't just cooling you down. It's triggering a physiological chain reaction that most doctors don't even think to warn you about until it's too late. I've spent over 15 years in cardiology, and I've seen firsthand how the little things we do out of habit become the very things that land us in the ER. We're taught from childhood that hydration is the holy grail of health. But nobody mentions that the temperature of that hydration can be a literal heart stopper once your cardiovascular system hits its sixth decade. It sounds like a tall tale, right? How could something as pure as water be dangerous? Here's the reality. Your body at 65 doesn't recover from thermal shocks the way it did at 25. When you gulp down ice water, you aren't just hydrating, you're stimulating the vagus nerve, which sits right behind your esophagus and acts as the brake pedal for your heart. But it gets worse. For a younger person, that brake pedal might just cause a tiny flutter. For someone over 60, it can trigger a sudden drop in heart rate or even an arrhythmia that you might mistake for simple indigestion. Most people ignore that heavy feeling in their chest after a cold drink, thinking they just drank too fast. In reality, your heart is struggling to maintain its rhythm while your internal temperature fluctuates. You've probably seen the headlines about athletes collapsing or people having freak heart episodes. We often look for a massive, underlying disease, but we ignore the immediate triggers. Think of your heart like a finely tuned engine. When that engine is hot and you dump freezing liquid directly onto the components, things start to warp and seize. Now, you might be asking yourself, does this mean I have to drink lukewarm tea in the middle of July? Not necessarily, but the ice-cold habit is a gamble you don't need to take anymore. I know this sounds extreme, but stick with me, because the science behind how your blood vessels constrict in response to that cold shock is the missing piece of the puzzle in senior cardiac care. If this is the first time you're hearing about the vagus response, or why temperature regulation is a life or death matter for your heart, you're exactly where you need to be. We're pulling back the curtain on the hidden stressors in your daily routine that your standard checkup misses. If you value these kinds of insider health deep dives, make sure you're subscribed to Smart Senior Secrets. We're here to make sure your golden years are actually healthy ones. The connection between your throat and your thoracic cavity is much tighter than you realize. When you swallow that ice-cold liquid, it passes within millimeters of your heart's left atrium. The thermal transfer is almost instantaneous. And that's just the beginning of the story. To understand why that ice water is such a gamble, we have to look at the hidden plumbing of your chest. Most people think of their esophagus as just a food tube, but in reality, it's the back door to your heart. The esophagus runs directly behind the left atrium, the part of your heart that controls its rhythm. When you send a freezing 34-degree liquid down that pipe, you're basically putting an ice pack directly onto your heart's electrical center. But here's the secret that most general practitioners don't mention. This triggers a double whammy effect that can send a 60-year-old cardiovascular system into a tailspin. First, there's the vagus nerve response. Think of this nerve as your body's internal volume knob. It regulates your heart rate, digestion, and blood pressure. When that sudden chill hits the back of your throat and esophagus, the vagus nerve panics. It thinks you've just been submerged in a freezing lake. To protect you, it slams on the brakes. Your heart rate can drop instantly, a condition called bradycardia. For a young athlete, this might be a minor blip. But for us, that sudden deceleration can cause dizziness, brain fog, or a terrifying feeling that your heart just skipped a beat. Wait until you hear what's happening on the other side of the coin, though. While the vagus nerve is trying to slow your heart down, your blood vessels are doing the exact opposite. This is what we call the pressure response. The moment your internal sensors detect that extreme cold, your arteries pull an emergency squeeze. They constrict, tightening up to keep your core temperature stable. This is called vasoconstriction. In your 20s, your arteries were like flexible rubber hoses. They could handle a little squeeze. But after 60, our arteries are more like garden hoses that have been left out in the sun. They're stiffer. When those stiff pipes get squeezed by a cold-induced reflex, your blood pressure doesn't just nudge up, it spikes. Now, imagine the chaos. Your vagus nerve is trying to slow the heart down, while your tightened arteries are forcing the heart to pump harder against massive resistance. In the medical world, we call this autonomic conflict. It's like trying to floor the gas pedal and slam on the brakes at the exact same time. This isn't just theory, either. There is a documented phenomenon called cold drink heart. Researchers have found that in people over 60, this internal thermal shock is a leading silent trigger for atrial fibrillation, or AFib. That fluttering in your chest you felt after drinking that iced tea? That wasn't just swallowing wrong. That was likely your heart's electrical system short-circuiting because it couldn't handle the temperature swing. But it gets even more localized than that. Because the cold liquid is so close to the heart, it can actually cause the coronary arteries, the tiny vessels that feed the heart muscle itself, to spasm. If you already have a bit of plaque buildup, which, let's be honest, most of us do by age 65, that spasm can temporarily restrict blood flow to the heart muscle. I've had patients come in convinced they were having a heart attack, only to realize the clot was actually just a 32-ounce super-chilled soda they finished in 5 minutes. You're probably wondering, if cold water is this disruptive, why isn't everyone talking about it? The truth is, most people blame the symptoms on something else. They think they're just tired, or it's just the heat. But once you see the data on how temperature-sensitive the senior heart really is, you can't unsee it. Now, before you go tossing out your ice cube trays, there is a specific way to retrain your body to hydrate without the heart-stopping side effects. And no, it doesn't involve drinking hot water in a heat wave. So, if ice-cold water is the silent trigger, what are you supposed to do when the thermometer hits 90 degrees? The answer isn't to suffer through a glass of lukewarm tap water that tastes like a garden hose. It's about understanding the Goldilocks zone for your cardiovascular health. In my years of practice, I've developed what I call the 60 at 60 rule. If you are over 60, your water temperature should ideally be around 60 degrees Fahrenheit, roughly cool or cellar temp, but never ice chest cold. This allows your body to hydrate and cool down without the violent vascular snapback we've been talking about. But what if you've already been a lifelong ice cruncher? Here's how you spot if your heart is struggling with your hydration habits before it turns into a medical emergency. Watch for the 3-minute shadow. If you feel a dull ache in your jaw, a sudden shortness of breath, or a strange flutter in your throat within 3 minutes of drinking something cold, your heart is sending you a warning shot. Don't brush it off as brain freeze. A brain freeze is just your nerves reacting. A chest freeze is your heart reacting. And here is the most important part, the shock prevention technique. If you absolutely must have a cold drink, you have to prime the pump. Take a tiny sip, hold it in your mouth for 3 seconds to warm it up, and then swallow. This alerts your vagus nerve that something cold is coming, preventing that slamming on the brakes reflex. It sounds simple, but this tiny habit can literally prevent a spike in blood pressure. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. Porter, I've been drinking ice water since the Eisenhower administration, and I'm fine. And to that, I say, I'm glad. But your heart at 70 is not the same heart you had at 40. The elasticity of your aorta and the sensitivity of your nerve endings change. Why play Russian roulette with your heart rhythm for the sake of a few ice cubes? Think of your body like a vintage classic car. You wouldn't take a high-performance engine that's been running hot and suddenly spray the block with freezing water, would you? You'd wait for it to cool down naturally. Treat your heart with that same level of respect. Switching to cool, filtered water instead of iced water is one of the easiest, zero-cost health hacks you can implement today. It requires no prescriptions, no gym memberships, and no radical diets. It just requires you to listen to what your body is telling you. We've covered a lot of ground today, from the vagus nerve brake pedal to the hidden thermal bridge between your throat and your heart. But the conversation doesn't end here. There are so many of these silent stressors that we encounter every day as we age. If you found this investigation eye-opening, do me a favor. Share this with one friend who you know always carries around an insulated mug full of ice. You might just be saving them a trip to the cardiologist. And if you want to keep discovering these hidden secrets to longevity that the mainstream media tends to skip over, make sure you're subscribed to Smart Senior Secrets. We're just getting started on this journey to keep you sharp, strong, and heart healthy. Stay hydrated, stay smart, and most importantly, stay cool, not frozen.